story time about when my coworker pulled out a knife on me. It sounds so dramatic, but it's true. Back in 2010, I got hired as a waitress at a hookah lounge in Glendale, California. I was trained by the lead server. I'm gonna call her Leslie. Leslie was really cool at first, and we got along pretty well. She was also an aspiring model like me, but the difference was that I had already gotten some modeling work and I had representation, and so she would ask me about how to get an agent and I would give her as much information as I could. I was very happy to help her. Our main job was to upsell hookahs, and the bosses noticed that I was pretty good at it, so within a few weeks they were congratulating me and being very vocal about how happy they were that I was working there. I could tell that this made Leslie a little bit jealous, and she quickly became very cold towards me. Whenever I entered a room, she would start talking bad about me on purpose so that I could hear her talking bad about me, and because I wouldn't react the way she wanted to, she would get very upset. She began to poison the servers against me and even the cooks in the kitchen. I then got a raise and the bosses told me in front of her, and this made her even more upset. She clearly had some issues and I felt bad for her, but it didn't give her the right to treat me like that. This is where it gets scary. Come back for part two. Part two. My coworker, who I'm calling Leslie, was very envious of the fact that I was doing well at the job and that the bosses were happy with me. I had also gotten a raise and I was making as much money as she was, and she had been there for a very long time. She would talk bad about me as soon as I came into the room, and she would make sure I would hear her, and it got so bad that I would ask her a question and she would flat out ignore me, pretend like I just wasn't even there. I couldn't work like that any longer, so I went up to the bosses and I told them what was happening, and they were not surprised. They basically said, "It's okay, don't worry about it, just ignore her, she'll get over it." And they told me that they were going to talk to her. They told me not to worry, and I went home. The following morning, I wake up early and I go to the hookah lounge because I had the opening shift. As soon as I pull up to the hookah lounge, I see her car parked, and it was the only one there, which told me I was going to be by myself with her. I walk in and I see that she's sitting at a table with one of the other guy servers who's completely in love with her and will do anything she wants. They see me come in and they start walking very fast toward me. She starts yelling that I have cellulite, that I have back knee, that I'm too short, that I'll never make it as an actress. Come back for part three, it gets scary. Part three. My coworker Leslie is yelling at me, telling me I have cellulite, I have back knee, that I'm short, that I'll never make it as an actress or a model, and the guy that's standing right next to her is our coworker, and he's totally in love with her and will do anything she wants. He chimes in every now and then and starts calling me a bitch and other names. She's also doing the same. Every time I would try to say something, they would both interrupt me and she would just yell louder and louder. I didn't know what to do, so I started walking backwards toward my car. The other coworker, I'll call him Mark. Mark had something in his hand and I couldn't really tell what it was. Then he pulls up his hand and I see that he has a pocket knife. I was ready to poo my pants, you guys. She starts laughing at me because she can tell that I'm really scared, and he's just laughing as well. She called me a rat because I told the bosses about what she did, and she said that this needed to be fixed between her and I, no one else. I got mad and I said, well then why do you have Mark here with a knife? I told her we could just talk about things, and I asked him to leave and he said no. I tried talking some sense into them, but they just were not listening to me whatsoever. They were just so angry. Come back for part four. Part four. So I'm standing in the parking lot and my coworker Leslie is yelling her face off at me, and my other coworker Mark has a knife in his hand. I'm sobbing at this point because I'm terrified. Obviously, who wouldn't be? I managed to get the car door open and I slid inside really quick. I closed the door behind me and then she started banging on the window and she told me to come out. I didn't. I turned on my car and I sped away. I called my bosses right away and I was like, look, this just happened. Check your security cameras. They checked the security camera and they saw the whole thing. They said they were in shock, that they didn't know that she was capable of such a thing, and that they didn't even think that it would occur to her to get someone else involved with a knife. But guess what? They didn't fire her. They told me to go back to the restaurant so that she could apologize to me because they were afraid that I was going to press charges and that the hookah lounge would suffer. And I went back to the hookah lounge because I didn't want to lose my job, and I thought, you know what, I'll just accept her apology and that'll be it. She was begging me for forgiveness. She cried and she told me that she wishes she never said anything to me and that she thought I was very pretty and that she apologized for getting Mark involved. Mark didn't say anything to me and he didn't get fired. Neither of them did. I quit. Toxic best friend story time. My best friend's name was Jessica, and she was from Pennsylvania, and she was from a broken home, and when she met my mom, she absolutely loved my mom, and we became fast friends really quick. She always wanted to come over to my house, and when I didn't want her to come over for some reason because I wanted to be with my family, she would get really upset. She became really possessive over me with my family and other people at school, so I basically couldn't have any other friends except for her. And when she would see me hang out with people, she would start making up rumors and accuse me of having talked bad about other people. Jessica was also really promiscuous, but I never judged her for it. I supported her in whatever she wanted to do, like hang out with older boys, like much older boys. And one day she came to me and said that she was pregnant and that she was planning on having an abortion. 2 months later, she came out and said the same. Part two of Toxic Best Friend. TikTok deleted this, don't know why. So my best friend comes to my house having had 2 abortions in 1 month at this point, and she was upset. She was crying. She felt sick. She had nausea. I gave her medication like ibuprofen or something. I didn't know what to do. I was a 13-year-old child. And then she told me that she was in love with me and that she didn't know what she would do if I didn't love her the same way back. At this point, my hands were shaking, my knees were shaking. I didn't know how to help her. The thought of her being sick at my house and her family not knowing was making me feel horrible. The fact that I hadn't told my mom at that point made me feel horrible. So I went and I told my mom. She called her family right away, and they came to pick her up. They took her to the hospital right away. My mom and I were checking on her every single day during the time that she was in the hospital, calling, finding out how she was. The next week, okay, so people were judging me in the last video because I snitched, but I was 13, you guys. What would you do if you were 13 and your friend was sick in your house? Toxic best friend story time part 3. So this week at school was horrible. I show up and there are so many things written on my locker. Nobody knew. The principal had it all cleaned up. The boys were being really aggressive with me, writing me letters, threatening letters. One boy tried to push me up against the wall and tried to kiss me. I didn't let him, but that was that first time that had happened. And I had already been bullied a lot at this point, so I wasn't too surprised, but I was like, why would she be doing this after telling me that she loved me? Right. It also didn't help that the principal made it a point to come to my class and interrogate everyone about the locker situation. No one spoke, but it made me even more of a target. I was already so bullied at this point. I was dying. And I never really saw her after that. Her parents flew her back to Pennsylvania because this all happened in Nicaragua. All I know is that she's a stripper now, and she still tries to contact me on Instagram, and my brother's on social media. They don't pay attention to her, and I know that she's had trouble with. Someone left this comment on the last part of the toxic best friend story, part number 3, which is totally fine. I get you. I'm going to clarify. At the time, I was 13 years old, and when my best friend came to my house after she had an abortion to try to recuperate, I realized how physically bad she was. She was in so much pain. She was crying all the time, and she basically told me that she was in love with me, and that if I didn't love her back the way she loved me, then she didn't know what she was going to do. Of course, I went and told my mom. Whether you think that's snitching or not, it's beyond me. I did not know what to do. I gave her medicine, and her aunt came to pick her up after I told my mom, and they put her in a 72-hour hold in a psychiatric hospital, which is why her retaliation in school the following week was so severe. She got boys to try to physically, sexually assault me, threaten me, call me at all hours of the night. So yeah, I did tell my mom. As a 13-year-old girl, the responsible thing to do was tell my mom. Story time of when my best friend set me up to get sexually assaulted. I was 13 at the time, and I didn't have many friends in this school because I was bullied a lot because I was a model and I came out on the local newspaper and in magazines and stuff like that. I also was really afraid of people not liking me, so I never stood up for myself. Anyway, this one really popular girl in my class decided to befriend me one day, and I was really appreciative and I really liked her, and she was kind of like the queen bee, the mean girl. She had all the control over the guys, and I was like, I want to be like that, but I was never able to be like her because I just didn't have the balls. Anyway, so at this point, we were like friends for about 2 months. I would go over her house, she would come over to mine, but she was never really like a best friend. She was like a friend to my face, but then like I would find out she was talking bad about me. So anyway, she invited me to her house one day, and I show up and there's all these like older strange boys that I don't know about. Come back for part 2. Part 2 of my best friend setting me up. So I'm in her house with a bunch of strange boys and 3 girls from my class. So I at least knew some of the girls that were there. We were in her garage and the door was closed and we were all playing ping pong. Suddenly, everyone runs out and they all leave me alone with one of the boys. They close the door and they lock it, and I could tell that they locked it, so I quickly ran toward the door and he stopped me and he began telling me that he really liked me and that he had noticed me around school and if I wanted to be with him. And then he started trying to kiss me and do other things to me, but I pushed him away. I ran toward the door and my best friend was right there on the other side, obviously listening. And then she opens the door and she's like, calm down, relax, because at that point I was hitting the door. And then she basically accused me of lying and overreacting, and then I just ran. Story time of when I was almost trafficked in Morocco. My last story time got over 1 million views. That is insane. So I'm going to share with you guys some more story times. These are cautionary tales, so listen up. Back in 2018, my husband and I went to Egypt and Morocco. We had spent about 2 weeks in Egypt, and during that time, I had been completely covered up. I did not show any skin at all, and I knew that I definitely didn't want to do that. I didn't want to offend anyone. I also covered my hair when we were in mosques and certain places. We went to Marrakesh, and we stayed at a beautiful hotel called La Sultana, and this was a time that I just wanted to chill. I just wanted to enjoy the hotel, but my husband insisted on going out shopping and like doing touristy things, so we went to the market the first night we got there. It was already a little bit dark, and as we were walking to the market, I noticed a man kept looking at us and following us, and I'm very aware of my surroundings, so I kept looking back, and he was always there. As we got closer to the market, he was still behind us and looking. Come back for part two of almost getting trafficked in Morocco. So we're at the market, and this man keeps staring at us and is like 2 steps behind us. I'm totally aware. My husband isn't. He's not paranoid about these things at all because he's a man. I'm a woman. He just doesn't care. So I tell him, you know what, let's just take a cab back to the hotel. This way he doesn't follow us back to the hotel. My husband says, okay. I wave down a cab. We get into the cab, and this man just stares at us really hard as we drive away in the cab. And I tell my husband, are you looking? And he's like, yeah, you're right. I think he might be looking at us. My husband isn't worried at this point at all. We end up going back to the hotel. We have a great night. And then the next morning I wake up and I get my period. So I think I need to go buy some pills. And across the street, there was this little shop. And the lobby at the hotel said, we can go get it for you. And I said, no, it's totally fine. I will go. My husband was at the pool, so I decided to go by myself. And guess who I see when I get to the pharmacy? It's the same guy. Come back for part 3. Part 3 of almost getting trafficked in Morocco. So I'm inside the pharmacy, I spot the guy, and as I exit, he grabs my arm and he says, you're my friend, come with me. A car pulls up, they open the door, and he's to my right. And I'm thinking, what in the world? I was petrified, and I kept pulling my arm back. I just kept saying no, but he was like blocking my way. Then I turn to my left and I hear someone yell something, like in a different language, and I say to myself, this is either someone trying to help me or trying to get me into the car. So I pushed past that person, and then I feel someone yank the hair out of my scalp. Like I'm running, and like they were clearly trying to hold me back by my hair, and I run past by them. I go to the hotel, I tell a receptionist, and she explains to me that at that time there was people disappearing, tourists, and they thought it could be linked to human trafficking, and for me not to go outside by myself after that. Of course I didn't. I was super. Story time of how I got out of an abusive relationship with a C-list celebrity. Trigger warning, I will be talking about domestic violence. I'm not going to say his name in the video because honestly I'm just scared of him, and I'm sure you guys are going to guess in the comments, so guess away. So this all happened 9 years ago. I was super young and naive, living in LA, working as a cocktail waitress at a strip club called Deja Vu. It was in the Valley. So one night he comes in, he's super stunning. I recognize him right away. He was on a famous daytime soap opera, and I knew exactly who he was. He came in, went straight to the bar, and just stayed there with me the entire night, begging me for my number. Eventually I gave it to him like an idiot. He manipulated me. He was absolutely charming, of course. And 2 weeks into the relationship, we had been going to amazing restaurants, and he was so charming, and you know, life was perfect. Until one day he calls me and tells me that he has a substance abuse problem. Of course, like an idiot, I'm like, I want to help you. I want to change you. Come back for part 2. Part 2, I tell him I want to stay with him and help him through his addiction. This was so naive of me because I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I go over to his place that same night. I make us dinner, and he's acting really strange, and I realize, oh my gosh, he must be on drugs. Like, this is the first time I've ever seen him this way. And suddenly he begins to accuse me of being an escort and a prostitute, and he says that he has evidence. He shows me all of these like printout pictures from an escort website when clearly it's not even the same person as me. And I had to spend the whole night trying to convince him. It was a huge fight. And then he asks me to quit my jobs, and I told him I will. He offers me $4,000 a month to live off of, but I told him I don't want to be with him for the money, so I didn't take it. He took that as basically me saying that I'm not going to quit being a prostitute. So then eventually I stopped going to auditions, answering my phone calls. I ignore my family because I'm just afraid of him thinking that I'm looking at my phone too much or that I'm talking to other people. Part 3, it got so bad that he didn't believe a word I said. I offered to have cameras installed in my apartment so that he could watch everything I was doing because he had accused me of having men over my apartment. And then he asked me to take a polygraph test, but somehow he finds a con man. This con man fakes the polygraph test and tells him that I failed every single question, even the question about my name. That night we go back to his place. He calls me a bunch of names and does other things I don't want to say exactly, but I survived. I got out. He held me in his house for 16 hours against my will. I was begging him to let me leave, and he wouldn't. Eventually, when I did leave, he apologized, He had broken my apartment key, my credit card. He had ripped apart my purse searching for things, and I did get out of the relationship, and he is the most terrible person I know. So if you are in an abusive relationship, please get out. Be safe and just leave. Continuation of the story time I posted about my celebrity ex. He was abusive and he was named in the comments by someone. I did confirm who it was, so if you guys are curious, please go back to that story time. It's my celebrity story time about my celebrity ex or something like that, so go back to that story time so you can see the comments and learn who it is. So a lot of you guys are curious about how we met, so here we go. I was working at the strip club as a cocktail waitress. He came in one night and it was like lust at first sight. I don't know if you guys have ever experienced that before, but it's a really powerful thing. So he stayed at the bar the whole night and was really aggressive about getting my phone number. First red flag. Didn't even realize it. Honestly, I just thought he was super charming. So the very next day, he's already texting me, asking me if I want to go to have breakfast. I kept saying no, and for about a week, he was chasing me, and I swear to God, he loved the chase. And I eventually said yes. We went to dinner, and it was a really nice, fancy dinner. And he was very aggressive, you know, wanting to kiss me and stuff, and I let him. Part 2, so the dinner was really romantic. It was really fancy, and he tried to kiss me, and I kind of pulled away. But he was really respectful, and then it just kind of snowballed. We had another date, and it was really nice, and then we had another date, and then on that third date, I went over to his house, and at the time, I was 20 years old. I was like a baby, and I was super nervous. I was like, I'm in a strange man's house. Like, what am I doing here? And then he kissed me, and it was like magical. It was just the most amazing thing ever. And this man just had this like power over me when it came to stuff like that. He was really romantic, and I had never experienced anything like that being so young. So anyway, weeks pass, and everything is wonderful. He's an amazing guy, and he even starts talking about marriage, and it's only been about a month into the relationship. 1 month, and he's already talking about marriage. So he basically asked me to marry him, and I said yes. Part 3, so at this point we're really happy. We're talking about marriage. So one day I go to Trader Joe's to buy everything I need for dinner, and he calls me when I'm there, and he says, look, I need to tell you something. I have a substance abuse problem, and this is basically, you're out. If you don't want to be in this relationship for that reason, you need to tell me now. And I said to him, absolutely not. I want to help you, because I was so naive. I thought I could actually help him. And I honestly thought he was telling me this because he wanted to change and he wanted to go to rehab, but no, he was only letting me know so that I could know what to expect from then on, because the relationship was never the same after that. Unfortunately, literally that day, he was not the same person anymore. It was the most bizarre thing ever. But from then on, he would put him and I in situations like where we were literally on the verge of getting caught by cops, or, you know, traveling somewhere, and he was carrying stuff. He was always accusing me of stuff. He was always accusing me of something, and it took him hitting me to leave. Story time about how I got out of the abusive relationship I was in with my celebrity ex. Yes, he is a celebrity. He's on TV right now, so if you want to know who it is, go to any of my other story times. His name is all over the comments. So after he made me take the lie detector test, which turned out to be a con because he had hired a con artist without him knowing, we didn't speak for about 3 days, but then he started texting me. We were going back and forth, and I knew that in order to end things, I needed to see him in person. Even though he had broken up with me, he was still trying to get back together with me, and I knew I had to end it, otherwise he wouldn't leave me alone. At this point, he had been physically and emotionally abusive with me, but every time it was because he was on some substance, and I knew that if he got off the substances, he would just be a better person. That was just me being naive and thinking that I could help him. Of course, as soon as I get there, he begins to accuse me of having stolen something from his closet, which I couldn't have because I wasn't even with him. He looks through my purse and he gets mad because he doesn't find anything. I knew that he was on something, and I could just tell that he was very aggressive. So I thought to myself, I better leave before he blows up. This is where it gets scary. Come back for part 2. Part 2, there is a trigger warning here. When he sees there's nothing in my purse, he actually throws it over a balcony that's inside of his bedroom that there is no access to, so I couldn't actually grab my purse or my keys and leave. I head to the door, and I thought, you know what, I will just sit outside and wait for him to calm down. But he doesn't let me leave, and he says, just hold on a second, I'm gonna go get some water. So he goes to the kitchen to grab some water, and then he comes back and throws the water in my face. I'm in shock at this point. Right away, I start crying instantly, and this always upset him whenever I cried, so he says, why are you crying now? And then he just acted like he hadn't thrown water in my face. I walk over to the bathroom to try to get a towel, and he does not let me get the towel. Instead, he pushes me into the shower and turns on the shower head. And he said, you definitely need to clean yourself. Who knows who you've been with? In that moment, I literally thought, what did I get myself into? I just walked into the lion's den. Then he hands me a towel. It does get scarier from here on, so come back for part 3. Part 3, trigger warning. So I get out of the shower, he hands me a towel, and then he begins to question me where I was, where I've been, and I know that he knows that I was home for that entire week because I actually saw him outside of my window one day and I saw his car parked further away, so he knows that I was home. Then he grabbed my phone from my purse, but didn't bring my purse down, just the phone, and starts looking through it. When he didn't find anything, he said, well, you must have deleted all the messages. This is when I black out. I woke up 10 hours later, still in the towel, wrapped up in the towel underneath the comforter, and him standing over me, and he says, you can leave now. He hands me my purse, and the look on his face is just horrendous. I could tell he had been crying all night. His eyes were super swollen. And when I look in my purse, I just see that he cut my ID, he cut my credit card, and bent my apartment key. I got dressed and I run out. Luckily, I was able to get into my apartment, even with the bent key. I waited a few days because I had some marks on me, but I then called my family. They got me a ticket to Miami. I went straight to Miami. I abandoned everything in LA, and I haven't. Story time of how I almost burnt my skin off last night. I was using those red drippy masks, the ones that look like blood, and I used it for the first time. I had no idea it was only supposed to be left on for 10 minutes, so I went and I made a smoothie and started scrolling through TikTok. Suddenly, 30 minutes had passed by, and my skin was burning. It was really hot, so I go wash it off and my face is bright red. I'm a brown girl. My face never gets red like that, like ever, and it was also stinging really bad, and when I touched my face it was really hot. So today I am taking it upon myself to heal my poor little skin. I'm using this Charisma clay mask, which is actually really hydrating and has a bunch of benefits. Look at the difference in my skin. Before and after. Oh my god, this is no filter. My skin looks so much better and it feels a lot more calm and not hot or red at all. I'm also using their daily moisturizer, and I put 2 pumps on now, but I also put 2 pumps on later because I need hydration in my life. I will never be using that mask again, and thank god I use these products. Story time of when I got sexually assaulted at the strip club I worked at. Now, I have many story times because I worked as a cocktail waitress, model, and actress in Los Angeles for a long time, so I have many stories of people who decided to try to take advantage of me, so I want to share them with you guys. In my last story time, so many people started opening up in the comments about their own experiences, so here we go. In 2011, I got hired as a cocktail waitress at this strip club called Deja Vu. I lived in Valley Village, and the strip club was in the valley, so it was about a mile away from me. It was the perfect situation. I loved it. It was a fun environment. I got along with everyone, but 2 months in, there was always this man that used to come in with his friends, and he had a dedicated cocktail waitress, so I never got the chance to serve him. But one day she showed up late, so I decided to go serve him myself. And when I went to his table, he was nice, didn't say much, but everyone knew of this guy as a really powerful rich guy. Right away, he gave me $100 and told me to sit down next to him. So I did. I sat down, I took their order, and then So he asked me my name, I tell him, and then he tells me to go get the drinks. But before I leave, he gives me another $100. So at this point, he's given me $200. And I didn't realize that what he was trying to do was groom me. He was preparing me for what was to come. In other words, he had paid me. Now he could do whatever he wanted. So I go get the drinks. I come back to the table, and he asked me to sit again. By the way, his friends are still at the table, right there in front of us. And I sit down, he starts asking me a bunch of questions. I feel uncomfortable, so I start getting up to leave. And then he grabs me by the shoulders and sticks his tongue down my throat. And if that wasn't disgusting enough, he grabs my you-know-what down there and starts fondling me. If you've never been handled like this, you guys, it's a extremely shocking experience to be handled like that. Like, for a second, you're just like, what's happening? What do I do? All I did, or all I could do, was push him away. And once I got free of his hold, he looks at me in shock and says, "What are you doing? I paid you." So I literally ran away from the table. I can hear his friends laughing, cackling at me like this was such an entertaining part of their night. And the guy was just yelling at me, asking me to come back to him. I didn't. I ran away. My knees were buckling. I was sweating, and I ran straight to the security guard who usually had my back. I told him what happened, and he's like, "Hey, look, we can't tell this guy to leave because the club is scared of him because he's a drug runner. He's a well-known drug runner." So I ran over to the back room. I happened to come across the server who usually serves him, and I tell her what happened, and she was just like, "Oh, don't worry, he's just like that, and he usually gives me $2,000 a night. You should have stayed." I was in shock, like complete shock. I went home. I cried for frickin' days. I didn't go back to the club, and when I finally did, 2 weeks later, I met my abusive ex. Here's a little story time of what my crazy celebrity ex-boyfriend would get mad at if I did or did not do. He would get mad if I would, for example, go to the DMV and put lip gloss on to take a picture. He said that I was trying to get attention from other guys, and the fact that he wasn't going with me proved that I was trying to get attention from other guys, therefore pick up guys at the DMV. He would also get mad if I showed him too much affection or if I tried to kiss him, because he said that that meant that I was a nymphomaniac and that the only conclusion he could come to was that I was cheating on him because I was a nymphomaniac. So eventually I stopped being affectionate altogether, and that made him think that I didn't want him because I was never affectionate. So I told him one day, well, if I am affectionate, it's bad, but if I'm not affectionate, it's bad. And he said, you're right, so you're stuck. He would also, for some reason, think that I was Lil Wayne's side chick. So anytime a Lil Wayne song came on, I had to. Part 2 of what my celebrity ex-boyfriend would get mad at if I did or didn't do. He would get mad if I answered the phone too quick, because that meant that I was hiding something and I didn't want him to be suspicious. But it also made him mad if I didn't answer the phone quick enough, because that meant that I was definitely doing something bad. He would also get mad if I offered to go over to his place instead of mine, because that meant I was hiding guys in my apartment, in my bathroom, and in my closet. So he would randomly show up to my apartment, check underneath my bed, my closets, and my bathrooms. And when he saw that there was no one there, he would storm out and say, I'm going to catch you one day. He would also get upset if my manager or my agent called me telling me that I had an audition, because it made him envious, although he would say that what they were trying to do was actually pimp me out. He would get so envious and jealous if I had booked a commercial, if I was working on set, or if I had anything going for me in my life other than him. Part 3 of all the things that would make my crazy celebrity ex-boyfriend jealous and upset. I happened to look like Lil Wayne's celebrity ex at the time, so Lil Wayne happened to say my name in a rap song, although I didn't know Lil Wayne, and he thought that that meant that I was for sure sleeping with Lil Wayne, although I didn't know Lil Wayne. He thought that I had all these connections with rappers and that I spent time with them every single week, although I spent my time with him all the time. He would also get upset when random girls on the street would stare at me for any reason, because he thought that her and I had this whole history and that I was trying to take her guy, and for that reason she hated me. And for that reason, she was looking at me. It couldn't be anything else, like maybe she liked my clothes or something. It had to be the fact that I was doing something bad to her. He also hated when guys stared at me, because that meant that I knew the guy from someplace and that the guy was following us around, keeping tabs on me, because he was probably my pimp or my lover. Right. And God forbid anyone gave me a compliment, he would get envious and jealous. But if someone said I had nice eyes, I hated it. I would avoid eye contact with people just so that no one would say anything. Part 4 of what would make my celebrity ex-boyfriend crazy, jealous, and mad. Because he was so jealous and controlling, I never put my phone in my pocket or in my hand or anything like that, because I didn't want him to think that I was hiding anything from him. I always left it in plain sight so that he could check it if he wanted to. So this one time my mom called me and I answered the phone. He was right there in front of me and I said, hi mom, blah, 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 blah. We had a bit of a conversation and he got up and left. So I stayed in the room and I left my phone there, and then I went to the kitchen where he was, and he comes up to me and he says, who was that on the phone? And I said, that was my mom. And he's like, no, it wasn't. That's why I had to leave the room, because I couldn't stand listening to you lie to my face. I said, why don't you go check my phone to see if it's actually my mom? So guess what he does? He goes and grabs my phone and calls my mom. He says, who is this? He was so rude to her. I was mortified. And worst of all, my mom thought it was a joke, so she kind of started laughing, and then he hung up on her. After that, he didn't speak to me for at least a week, and then he broke up with me. Part 5 of what would make my celebrity ex-boyfriend crazy jealous. One of the things that would instantly make him upset was if I answered my text messages too quick when they came in. So whenever a text message would come in, I would wait 4 to 5 minutes so that he could see that I was in no rush to get it. If I did answer it too quick, he thought that I had a pimp or somebody waiting for me and that I was just getting ready to go to work. So this one time my mom messages me and I see her text message come in, so I grab my phone right away to text her back, because we weren't really talking on the phone much because of him. He would always get jealous. Seeing that my mom texted me, I picked up the phone and I replied back. He grabbed it from me instantly without even saying anything and asked who it was, and I said it was my mom. He looked at all the messages. He actually read all of my messages with my mom nonstop for about 30 minutes and then came to the conclusion that it wasn't her. He then interrogated me for an hour, and then he kicked me out because I wouldn't tell him who it was. Part 5 of what would make my celebrity ex super angry and jealous. He would always get mad if I was nice to our server, whether it was a man or a woman, because to him it was competition and it meant that I wanted them because I was being nice to them. I would mostly stay over at his place, and trust me, there were days where I just wanted to be by myself. So in order for me to go home, I would have to come up with an excuse like I was waiting for a package, or I had to go clean my apartment, or my landlord needed me there, because if I went home, he would get mad. Part 7 of what would make my celebrity
relationship like
ex
that, and
crazy,
we all
jealous,
deserve
and mad.
love.
He would always get mad if I would go run errands by myself, so eventually I had to ask him to go everywhere with me, but then this made him think that I was clingy, although I had to act like I was clingy so that he thought that I wanted to be with him all the time, but I didn't really. Everyone wants their own space, for goodness sake, just to go to run errands. I could never show him that I was independent because if I showed him that I was independent, it meant that I didn't need him, and that terrified him. He would also get mad if I spent too much time on my laptop, so any work I had to do, I would have to do it really fast because otherwise he would be right there over my shoulder looking and asking what I was doing, and I hated that. I've had a lot of DMs from girls saying that they've had similar situations or that they're currently in a similar situation, and I'm happy to be able to help you guys. If you're in a really toxic relationship right now or being abused in any sort of way, please look out for yourself. Please find help. Please tell your family if you can. Here's a story time of when my crazy ex made me take a polygraph test. A little backstory, we had been together for 4 months at this point. 2 months into the relationship, he started acting strange. Before that, he was absolutely completely loving and normal. So since those 2 months were perfect, we had fallen in love and we had been talking about marriage and so many other plans. But then he started acting strange. He called me and told me he had a substance abuse problem, and nothing was the same after that. So at the 4-month mark of the relationship, he had started accusing me of being an escort and being with other guys, even though I spent all of my time with him, and I even offered to install cameras into my apartment, which he did not want to. So one day that he was mad at me, I knew that he was on something. I couldn't tell exactly what, but he came up to me and asked me if I would take a polygraph test, and I said absolutely. Little did I know that the polygrapher he hired was actually a con artist, so when we show up to this man's office to take the polygraph test, it was Part 2 of the polygraph test. I sit down in the chair and the polygrapher actually starts making comments about my eyes and my dress. Obviously, I was really uncomfortable. I look over at my boyfriend and he could tell that I was very uncomfortable, but he just kept the conversation going with the guy like nothing wrong was happening. In fact, he was holding my hand and making comments about how beautiful I was. Super odd behavior. Finally, the test is over and he reveals that I failed every single question, even the one about my name, where I live, and where I'm from, which is absolutely impossible. My boyfriend starts to sob instantly, and I pull out my phone and I begin to Google the guy. Lo and behold, I find 10 articles about how he's a con artist. I show it to him and then to my boyfriend, and he kicks us out of his office. He's still sobbing at this point. We drive back to his house and he's beside himself. He says, I don't know what to believe. And I said, well, you can believe the articles or you can believe me. This guy was obviously a con artist. I break up with him and I go back to my apartment. A week later, he comes looking for me and he is crying, and I took him back, unfortunately. Here's a story time of how I caught my ex with another girl at a bar. And no, this is not my celebrity ex. So this guy and I had been together for quite a few years and we had a lot of trust in the relationship, but I was visiting my family in Florida. He was in New York where we lived. And he tells me that he's going to go have dinner with this mutual friend of ours who is a girl. He's hung out with her before. I know her and she studied at the same school that we studied in, so I didn't think anything of it and I just said fine. He said they were going to have dinner, so about 8 hours passed, and I realized I hadn't heard from him in those 8 hours, so I text him and I'm like, hey, what are you doing? Are you home? So he says, yes, I'm actually home now, and I tell him, so what were you guys doing for 8 hours? And he says, we had dinner, we were talking a lot, and blah, 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 blah. And I just want to say I wasn't jealous at all in the relationship. We had a lot of trust, so we never checked each other's locations, but this time my instinct told me different, so of course I went and I checked his location, and he must have forgotten that we had our locations turned on, so guess what? Part 2 of how I caught my ex with another girl at a bar. So it's about midnight and he just told me that he was home, but my instinct told me differently, and I always trust my instinct. So I went and I checked his location and it turned out that he was somewhere in Brooklyn and we lived in Manhattan on the Upper East Side. So I take a screenshot and I send it to him, and guess what he does? He doesn't reply to my messages and proceeds to turn off his cell phone for the next 30 minutes. During those 30 minutes, he kept turning on his phone so I would see his updated location, so I would take a screenshot every time he moved, and I could tell that he was in a moving car, obviously trying to haul ass back to the apartment where he said he was. So as he kept turning it on and off, I kept taking screenshots every time he would turn it on. I was literally staring at my phone for those 30 minutes on the toilet. I was collecting all the proof so that he had no way of telling me that I was making things up or that I was wrong. So finally he turns his phone back on and he's 2 blocks away from the apartment. Part 3 of how I caught my ex with another girl at a bar. So I can see from his location that he is now 2 blocks away from the apartment. So he calls me and pretends like nothing happened. And I said to him, "Hey, look, here are all the screenshots. Take a look and explain yourself." He knows he got caught at this point, so he started crying, hyperventilating, almost having a panic attack. And he always did this whenever I got upset at him. I decided to grill him anyway. He begins to explain that he was having dinner with her and they then decided to go to a bar because they were having such a great time, and that he didn't want to tell me that he was at a bar because he thought that I would get suspicious. And I said, well, why would you do that instead of just telling me the truth when that would not have upset me? What upsets me is that I caught you lying to me and that you're at a bar in Brooklyn with some other girl. I definitely lost my trust and I told him to send me a statement of the bar, a bank statement, anything that proved that he was at this bar at that time, which he didn't. Of course, yeah, we're no longer together. Yeah.
Until you turned me around. I used to think I was nothing, but look at this love we found.
Story time about how I found out I had a stalker. This gets really scary, so let's start. I was living by myself in 2016 in Los Angeles. I was working a lot in commercials and modeling and doing a bunch of stuff, and I had my own little studio apartment on Melrose Avenue. It was super cute and I loved it. I felt very safe. 2 months into the lease, I booked some acting work, so I had to be on set for 3 days in a row, and I stayed in a hotel while I was on set, so I actually didn't get to go home. When I finally got home, I noticed that my fridge had moved about 2 feet to the right, which is very noticeable because that's a large space to cover, and I noticed that my fridge was just in a different place. So I called the landlord and asked her if they had to come into my apartment for some reason, and she said no. I didn't want to freak out, so I just tried to ignore it, and I thought, no one's coming into my apartment, that would be insane. For the next couple of days, I kept trying to justify how my fridge would move. I even thought that my apartment was probably being haunted by a ghost, until one day after an audition, I come home and I find that my Part 2, stalker story time. So I come home and I notice that my fridge has moved again, and I know this because I put it back and it was moved another 2 tiles, which is about 2 feet. So I quickly call the landlord and I say to her, can you please check any cameras if you guys have any? And lo and behold, she said, yes, we do have security cameras. Let's check right now. Come over to my place. So I run over to her apartment. She starts pulling up footage from that same day, but it's taking very long, and I ask her to actually check footage from the past few weeks so that I can see if anyone had been in my apartment the first time. So she pulls up the camera pointing to my hallway, but unfortunately the quality was so blurry and my door was just outside of the scope of the lens. Either way, I could still get kind of a glimpse. So she fast forwards through a few hours and finally I see a shadow. I tell her to stop and rewind and slow it down. And what I see literally made me poo my pants. Someone in a green shirt was right outside of my door and you could barely see their shoulder. Part 3, stalker story time. At the corner of the screen, I see there's a green shirt and it's like the shoulder of someone, and it seems like they just disappeared into the door. Of course, I instantly started to freak out. Can you guys imagine seeing that? I was hyperventilating. I started to cry and she was trying to calm me down. Just to be safe, she called the owner of the building and asked if they had sent a repairman. They said no. Of course, I called the police. They said if there was no immediate physical danger, they couldn't come. So they didn't. Of course, I installed cameras. I had an app so that I could check everything remotely whenever I was out of my apartment, and I never saw anything. After that, I would put the coffee table and a dresser in front of the door so that I could make sure nobody would come in while I was sleeping. I was very paranoid the whole time. I would cry every single day. To this day, I still don't know who it was. I don't know if they took anything. I don't know if they put anything in. I think after that time, they did not come back in, but obviously I did move out a month later. It was very scary. I started taking kickboxing and I still take it to this day. I think self-defense is super important, especially if you live by yourself. This is a story time about when I got sexually harassed by a famous showrunner in Hollywood. I find it extremely important to share these story times because I want to avoid this from happening to anyone else, and of course I just want to get the story out there so that people can become more educated and aware. I think it's atrocious what's happening in Hollywood, and I just want to do my part. Please like and share this. I want as many people as possible to see this, and I think it's finally time for me to speak up. It was 2016. I was living by myself in Los Angeles and I was lucky enough to work as an actress. One day I was walking down Melrose Avenue and I heard a man's voice yell out, "Hey, hey," right behind me, and I turn around and right beside me is this strange man and he says, "Hey, are you an actress or a model?" I replied saying, "Yes, why?" He said, "I'd like to have a photo shoot with you." He pulled out his phone and Googled his name because he really wanted me to see how important he was in Hollywood. He insisted about 10 times that I give him my phone number, and because I just didn't have a good feeling about him, I gave him my email address instead. For the next For the next 2 weeks, he would email me almost every single day asking me when I would want to shoot. The fact that he was chasing me so much really turned me off, and I had no desire to shoot with him at all. I was honest with him though, and I said, look, your behavior is kind of odd, so I don't think I'm going to be able to shoot with you. He kept swearing up and down that he didn't have any bad intentions, and he sent me his website so that I could take a look at his past work, and I saw on his website that he had shot with many other models and actresses, so I thought to contact one of them. I messaged one on Instagram, but she did not get back to me. Finally, I gave him my phone number just to see what kind of vibe I would get off of text. He messages me and starts begging to set up a photo shoot. Again, this turned me off. I didn't have a good feeling. I mentioned it to my best friend and she was like, don't worry, just set up the photo shoot and I'll go with you. This might be a good opportunity since he's a showrunner and maybe the pictures will come out good. We set up the photo shoot and it had been about a month since we first met. That weekend, my friend and I go to his house for the photo shoot. Thank God I did not go by myself. This is where it gets disturbing. Part 3 is up. 3. We show up to his beautiful house with 2 Teslas in the driveway. He tells my friend to go to his office because she brought her laptop so she could do some work. We go to the backyard and we start taking some pictures. We started with headshots, nothing crazy. We shot for a total of 1 minute before he started asking me weird questions. Do you have a boyfriend? Are you married? Do you live by yourself? I answered these questions thinking it was weird, but I just said, it's okay, relax. Then he asked if I masturbated and if I fucked people. I told him to stop taking pictures and he said, why are you overreacting? What's the matter with you? I was just trying to get to know you. This is what I do with my models. Of course, he was trying to put it on me like I was the weird one. I went to my best friend and I said, we're leaving right now, and she said, what happened? Tell me now. I told her everything he had just asked me and she said, yeah, let's go. I asked him for the SD card, but he said it was his private property and I couldn't touch it. On the way back to my apartment, I felt violated. I was crying and hyperventilating. My best friend was there with me the whole time. I appreciate her so much. I call my manager and I tell him what happened and he said, well, we can't do anything against this guy. You don't want to get blacklisted. Story time of when I unknowingly hung out with a famous actress's boyfriend. This was back in 2011. I was working at a strip club as a cocktail waitress. I had just broken up with my fiance of a year and a half, and I was definitely ready to start seeing some people and maybe just date. And before you say what I know you're thinking, it is a bad idea to meet guys at a strip club. Don't do it. So this guy comes in with his friends. I had no idea who he was. I'd never seen his face before. I served his table the whole night, and the whole night he just wanted to talk to me. He didn't get any dances from any of the other girls, so we proceeded to talk about acting because he was also an actor. We talked about life, music, and food, blah, 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 blah. He was just so charming. He knew exactly what to say, and I was totally falling for it. Eventually, he asked me for my phone number. I gave it to him. It didn't even occur to me to ask him if he was single or not. I assumed if he was giving me his phone number, he was probably single. As soon as he leaves, he texts me and asks me if I wanted to go to a party he's hosting the following night. I said yes. So the following night, I show up at his house, and I only find him and one other guy. He said everyone else went to get drinks. It definitely scared me that I was alone with him and one other guy that I didn't know, so come back for part 2 and 3. Part 2. So because I'm with this guy at his house and I realize that I'm by myself with him and his friend and I don't know them, I get a little bit nervous and I sit down at the table and I just don't speak for a few minutes. Then I started thinking, should I just go home because this is kind of weird? I don't want to be hanging out with 2 dudes that I don't even know. By the way, this was taking place in the backyard. I hadn't been inside the house. Finally, a few minutes later, a group of friends show up and there were girls in the group, so I was like, okay, I can relax now. They went inside the house to make drinks, so he asked me if I want to get in the jacuzzi. I said no because I don't have a swimsuit. Then he goes inside the house, brings back a swimsuit, and he's like, don't worry, we have plenty. And by we, I thought he meant him and his friend. Stupid of me, I know, right? Then he puts his hand on my knee and tells his friend to leave to go get his drinks. His friend very obediently leaves, and I was just like, okay, that's weird. As soon as we're by ourselves, he starts trying to kiss me, and he said, hurry up, we only have a few minutes. And then I said, can you slow down? And he said, no, hurry up, we only have a few minutes. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he's like, my friend's gonna come back soon. Obviously, it was really weird. I was really uncomfortable, and I had to keep pushing his hand off of me, which was really annoying. So I said to him, I have to go to the bathroom, come back for part 3. Part 3. So I'm by myself with this guy in the jacuzzi and he keeps trying to come on to me and I keep telling him no. Because he was trying to kiss me and I kept trying to push his hand away, I said I have to go to the bathroom. His friend finally comes out like 2 seconds later, which felt like an eternity to me. So he comes into the jacuzzi and this other guy just plays it off and pretends like he wasn't just trying to kiss me, which I just found so weird. So I grab a towel and I go inside the house looking for the bathroom. And as I'm walking through the house looking for the bathroom, I just see pictures of him with this other girl, this other famous actress, and I'm just like, wait a second. He's kissing her in the pictures. Oh, they're on the red carpet in this picture. Oh, this is her boyfriend. And I realize I'm standing in the house of this very famous actress with her boyfriend who's trying to hook up with me. Obviously, I left. He begged me not to leave and he kept texting me. Years later, that actress came out and said that he was abusive and that he tried to choke her, and I totally get that sense from him because he was so aggressive with me too. She even had to get a restraining order from him, but now she's engaged to someone else. And no, I never was able to get in contact with her to tell her what happened. Here's a story time about when I broke off my 1.5-year engagement with my ex-fiance. We met on a movie set. He was playing my boyfriend, and within a week, we were already calling each other boyfriend and girlfriend. 2 months into the relationship, he convinced me to move to LA with him because we both wanted to pursue acting seriously, and he was an established model already. He had worked in Tokyo and Paris as a model. Of course, I was so in love. I said yes, and I left my family, which was really heartbreaking for them. I will totally always regret that decision because I left way too soon. I was so young. We struggled for money in LA, but I decided to get a serving job, so I was making more money than he was because he was working at a movie theater making $8 an hour. Because of this, I had to pay for a lot of the bills, and I even started helping him pay off his school loans. We also shared a banking account, which was terrible because I was putting in way more money than he was. I hated the apartment we lived in because I would wake up with roaches in my hair, so I decided to get a second serving job. When I asked him to get a second job as well, he said no because he was very happy at his job. Part 2 is up. Part 2. So I asked my fiance if he could get a second job to help me out with the bills, and he said no. I would tell my mom and sisters about the situation, and they would tell me that he should definitely be helping me out more, and I just would make up excuses for him, and I just thought it's okay, he can work at the movie theater, and I will work my 2 jobs. At this point, I was paying for most of the rent, most of the bills, and his student school loans. Owed $20,000, you guys, and I was paying for all of that. I even got a 3rd job because I wanted to save up to move out of that crappy apartment. Finally, I got hired at the strip club as a cocktail waitress, and I was able to quit all of my other jobs. My ex-fiance was definitely happy with the amount of money I was making at the strip club. Of course, he felt absolutely no pressure to get a new job and help me out. I finally put my foot down and told him we were moving to a better apartment because I was not happy in the apartment we were in. I told him he had no right to say no because I was the one paying for everything. We found the perfect apartment and I loved it. It was absolutely beautiful and I felt so at home there. Then one night I was sexually assaulted at the strip club. Of course I was really affected by it. At first he was supportive, but after a few days he basically told me to get over it. Part 3. When he told me to just get over the sexual assault that I experienced at the strip club, I was shocked. I couldn't believe that the man I was about to marry would be so insensitive. And then I just started realizing, wait, I am paying for everything. I pay for your bills, I pay for your rent, I pay for your student loans, and you're here telling me to just get over this sexual assault. It was like someone had put a mirror to my face and was showing me the truth. Final straw was when I told him I wanted to quit the strip club because I didn't want to be in that environment and I didn't want to see the man that had sexually assaulted me again. He said, absolutely not, you can't quit, the money is too good. And that's when I broke up with him. I told him that I couldn't be with someone who didn't care enough about me and only really cared about the money and to be kept. He was so comfortable with me paying for everything and him just chilling at a job where he got paid $8 an hour while I was busting my butt every single night. He told me I would never find anyone better than him. The breakup was amicable, thank God. He didn't stress me out or anything. He kind of said, you know, you'll be back. Of course I never went back. Know your worth and be with someone who actually cares about you.